And the law of demand must be concepts that people have heard about the most before coming into this class, and probably the concepts that they will keep on remembering and using in the future. So, what exactly is the law of demand? Well, the law of demand states that the quantity demanded of a good will decrease when the price of this good increases. Okay, here it's very important to note that here we're talking about one specific good. It's not true. Some people would argue that if you were to put the price up of a car, go from a Toyota to a Porsche or something else, you have a situation that quantity demanded may go up. Here you're comparing two different goods. It must be important that you are looking at one specific good. So if you were to pay normally $30,000 for a specific car, the amount demanded at that price will be a certain amount. And if nothing else changes, but they simply decide to charge $40,000 for the same car, well, we would expect a smaller quantity demanded at that higher price. Again, this is holding everything else constant. There hasn't been a world earthquake or something else happening. Okay. And this law of demand may be represented in two different ways. One of the ways is that this law of demand can be represented using the demand schedule, which shows the relationship between price and quantity demanded for a certain individual. Here's an example. So you could notice we have two columns, and one of them is the price, and for a given price we have a given quantity demanded of yogurt by this individual. Some people would say, well, because this is free, you would expect quantity demanded to be extremely large, but if you assume that this person cannot resell the yogurt, cannot give it away to someone else, well, even though something is free, you're not going to consume crazy amounts of it just because it's free. If you're used to traveling in third world countries and you have to pay for bottled water and you come back to Canada and you have free water, that doesn't mean that you start drinking 30 liters a day. So this is the kind of situation. And naturally, as the price here goes up, we could see as the price becomes higher and higher and higher as we go down this way, we can notice that the quantity demanded is also going down as we're moving down this direction. Yeah. But this is for one specific individual. We could have individual demand versus market demand, and simply we would be adding the two quantities together. Okay, so if we look at this, we'll be talking about demand curves in a second, but if we look at this, for a certain price, that Jimmy demands a certain amount, Mary demands another amount, and if we add them up, we get to our market demand. So it would simply be this plus this is equal to this. But in reality, there's not only two individuals buying a certain product. There's going to be a very large amount of individuals. So as you add up all of those individuals together, well, the total quantity for a given price will give you your market demand. Okay. But we could also represent this demand relationship between price and quantity not through a table, but rather through a curve or a graph. So we want to represent the relationship between price and quantity. The thing is, when we think about the relationship between price and quantity, you would want to represent it because it's only between two different goods. We're holding everything else constant. Well, we could think that we're going to represent this graphically. And then afterwards, once again, you ask yourself, like, which of these goes on which axis? Well, typically you would think maybe it's quantity here based on quantity depends on the price. However, we'll often refer to this as the inverse demand curve or simply the demand curve because by convention, most people do it this way. We actually have price up above and quantity down below. If you were to do it the other way around, it's still right. You're still representing the relationship. However, this is going to be the most commonly form used in the textbooks, having price here and quantity down here. So we are holding everything else constant. And if we were to look at the situation that we had below, Well, we could think price of 0, I had 16. Price of 120, I have 0. So here, in this situation here, would be my $1.20 situation, 0 quantity. And here where it's 0 price, I would have 16 quantities. And then all of the other points would be points along this curve. And as you link them up, you get the demand curve. So how do you set it up? Is simply by plotting the relationship between this and the market demand here and representing it graphically. Okay, so graphically just shows the picture a little bit better, a little bit faster. One of the big things, the big places someone makes a mistake in this chapter, and this is the one slide I think I'll focus a little bit more energy on here, is the idea of changes in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. So for the people who don't know, this little triangle here is just a simple mathematical simplification that represents the word changes in demand versus change in quantity demanded on a same demand curve. Okay, so it's very important to know what represents what. It's a bit of a lingo thing, but at the same time, it's very important to understand this relationship. So if I think of a demand curve as I had before, this kind of price, quantity, and then I have my demand curve that demonstrates this relationship between the two. We say that the only factor that could cause a change in quantity demanded is the price. All other factors will cause a change in demand. So here, if I were to face this price of, let's say 80 cents for yogurt, and there's a certain quantity demanded at that price, well, this is my quantity demanded for 80 cents. If the price for some reason were to drop to 60 cents, and we'll see what those reasons may be in the future, well, we would notice that we would now have a greater quantity demanded. By our law of demand, as the price fell, quantity demanded has gone up. But the big thing here that you have to note is that as price, there's been a decrease in price, demand curve has not shifted. It's very important here to note that as the price has gone down, the demand curve has not shifted. It has stayed the same because this demand curve represents the relationship between price and quantity at a specific point in time with a specific level of attributes and everything else going on in the marketplace. However, we may have a situation that the price does not change, and even if it were to change, but for a certain fixed price, let's say a price of 80 cents here, the quantity demanded no longer is this quantity, it's actually more or less than before. So these factors that lead to this situation are not price, because as price changes, this is represented graphically here, as price changes, we have a situation that I'm only moving along this demand curve. However, other things may shift demand. Okay. So here, when we're going to be looking at our market equilibrium changes, we have to make the difference between the two. So you have to ask yourself, what shifts the demand curve? Okay, so it's not the price. Think for a second here. What can make me want more of a product or less of a product at the same price as it used to be, okay, or anyone else? So you think of traveling or buying a computer, buying a car, buying yogurt, buying wine, buying anything. What may have an influence on this? Well, if I think of buying a computer, buying wine, traveling, and different things like that, when I was younger, I didn't do as much of that. But over time, for the same price, even though the price hasn't changed on a digital SLR camera or a good bottle of wine or anything, nothing really has changed. Over the years, my demand for those products has gone up. Okay? And there's many reasons why the demand for certain products may change, even though the price has not quite changed. So let's look at some of those reasons. So one of the big reasons why you may change your demand for a certain product is because of differences in taste or preferences. So if I think here, a situation where I used to buy beef, okay, even though beef was a certain amount of price per kilogram, I used to buy a certain quantity per meat, and now all of a sudden I have this situation where the price has gone up. Okay, so if I have this situation, not the price, but that there's been a mad cow disease that's been discovered, I have the situation that even if the price has stayed the same, I might fall to a situation that for that same price as before, demand less. If the price is just a little bit above, I actually no longer demand where I used to demand. And for even if the prices go down, my demand has fallen. Okay? So my relationship between price and the quantity that I choose to purchase has changed due to this change of an external factor, external to price of this specific good. So something else than the price has actually had an impact. But if we think about yogurt, if ever you realize that now yogurt may reduce the risk of getting Lyme's disease or something else, well, all of a sudden you could see a massive increase in the purchases of yogurt. Another big one, and it's the one I was kind of getting to a second ago when I was talking about myself, my change in my demand for wine, for computers, for digital cameras and different things like that, has been mainly to the fact that over the years, going from a student to being a professor, my income level has changed. Therefore, with my income level has changed, certain things such as nice cars, restaurant meals, fancy electronic equipment and different things like that have seen a rise in demand as my income has risen. So even though a specific product, its price has not changed, all of a sudden I could have a situation where the demand is now greater at that same price. Okay. This is just me, myself, on my own, but if you were to think about demand as a whole, as a large situation with a lot of people, well, as the economy does well, normal goods will typically do better because as people make more money, they go out to the restaurant more and different things like that. And as the economy goes well, actually, some people might reduce their consumption of other goods. So the thing that's very important to note with income is it's not true that as you make more money, you buy more of all goods. There's actually normal goods, but there's also inferior goods. And if I think of inferior goods, it's goods that as your income rises, your demand for those goods fall. So if you think of inexpensive food, bus rides, different things like that, so craft dinner or anything where you do it because it's your cheapest option, not because you love it. Well, those things, as your income rises, you actually do less of because you're like, I could get away from having to deal with this now. If you hate doing your cutting your grass, or you hate cleaning your toilet or different things like that, well, you might start hiring people to do those things as well. Different things like that. So but inferior goods is simply thinking about like craft dinner, or maybe if you often buy cans of tuna or something else. Well, as you grow and you make more money, you might have a situation that you decide, well, I'm just going to buy only fresh meat now. I won't buy canned meat anymore, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to note with income which direction it's going. And just to kind of keep in mind, if you're working in finance and you see a recession coming, another recession about to hit, well, keep in mind that as income goes down, actually the consumption of normal goods will go down as well, but inferior goods will increase. So if you could kind of spot the companies like Campbell's Soup and different things like that, that will actually do very well as the economy goes down, well, those will be good investments. Okay. What else can shift the demand curve? Well, the price of related goods has a big impact as well. So if I were to think about two different goods, they're either treated as substitutes or complements, and as they're treated as substitutes or complements, I'll have a situation as one of the goods that's price increases, it's going to have an impact on the other one. So I know here that if I have two pens available, these are pretty much perfect substitutes, except if you have a big preference for one or the other, they're very closely linked products. So let's say both pens are now selling for $1 each. Okay, so $1 for the black pen and $1 for the blue pen. And all of a sudden, the black pen goes up to $2, where the blue pen still stays at $1. Well, we know that as the price of the black pen will go up, we expect the quantity demanded for this specific product to go down. However, what's going to happen to the consumption of blue pens? Well, naturally, if you're seeing both as substitutes and the price of one goes up, you consume less of that, and naturally you're going to substitute away. So a lot of your consumption is going to go from black to blue. Simply because you have these two substitute goods and they're treated similarly to one another. So as the price of one goes up, you're going to simply consume more of the other one. Okay, so these are substitutes. The other alternative that could have an impact on demand, which is not due to the price of your own good, is due to the price of a complement good. So if you typically buy hot dogs and hot dog buns together, well, if you have a situation that the price of hot dogs go up, we know that as the price of hot dogs go up, we have this situation where the quantity demanded for hot dogs will go down. This is due to the law of demand. And then what would happen as you consume less hot dogs? Well, naturally, if you consume less hot dogs, you're probably going to consume less hot dog buns as well, because hot dog buns are not normally used to putting other stuff in there. You're not going to make a s'mores or something else with your hot dog buns. So typically you would expect hot dog buns demand to also fall. So this is something that companies keep in mind when, let's say if you're selling video games and video game consoles, well, you have to keep in mind that as the price of one changes, it's going to have an influence on its own demand, but it's going to have an influence on the demand of complement products. Same thing for ski resorts that are looking at different pricing decisions for their passes and situations such as ski rentals and lessons and different things like that. Well, as soon as you change the price of one, it could have an influence on the demand, and if there's less customers coming in, well, all of the sections will suffer from it. Okay. What else? So those were the main three. Population, naturally, if you expect more population to come in, well, if I had my demand schedule where I have my price and I have quantity demanded for the person A, quantity demanded for person B, well, if these were the only two individuals and we add a third person coming to life, well, as these people all consume, naturally, the total quantity demanded will go up. Pretty simple. Consumer expectations also comes to play. If you expect a sale to come up or if you expect something to happen in the future, it's going to have an influence on your demand today. So if you're going through a recession and you could see that the price of shoes and other things like that is like advertised at 30% one week, and you're thinking, oh, I should go buy some shoes, and then next week you see, it's 50%, then you start thinking, well, is it going to be 70% the next week, and so on and so forth? So that's going to have an influence on your demand today. You might just wait it out. If you see sales going larger and larger, same thing for the price of a home, the price of a stock, or anything else. But sometimes you could be very sure that prices will go down if you have, for some reason, really good knowledge about what the future prices will be and so on and so forth. Okay. So here I want to stress once again, there's a big change, there's a big difference between changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. So as I mentioned here, this is my demand curve from an initial situation. So this is something that represents my relationship between price and quantity demanded for the whole market. Based on a certain price, this is the total quantity demanded for the market. But this is based assuming different things are constant, such as this is based on a certain income level, a certain price for related goods, tastes, and so on and so forth. And this represents the relationship. So if we say, well, for some reason, supply goes up and it drives down the price, we'll see a supply later. But let's say for some reason we notice that price goes down, such as the price of the oil or gasoline or whatever else. Well, as the price goes down, my demand curve has not shifted. This is the price, let's say we're talking about gasoline here, and we see that the price has gone down. My demand curve has not shifted. However, I do demand, I have a greater quantity demanded than before because the price is lower. However, if something else happens, such as electrical cars come out strong or they start blowing up, so a lot of people with electrical cars goes back to gasoline, well then for a single price, you might have a situation where the demand is now greater, but this is due to an external factor.